Gabriel, Nassif, and Autumn Burchett all lined up and ready to battle. And I have to say, Paul, if I'm sitting in Autumn Burchett's seat, they brought this Gruul deck, which seems to have been having its way with the Omnath decks that have really dominated the event from a percentage of decks standing. And that's what Nassif has here.
Yeah, I think when Autumn was being interviewed, they maybe might have expected a little more Omnath ramp because people were thinking Omnath ramp was the deck that maybe goes over the top of the Omnath Adventures decks. I do think that this matchup is quite close. And given that Nassif has had the opportunity to play against this deck already, actually losing to Autumn in the Swiss portions, I think he'll be a little better equipped in this matchup and understand what the important cards are. I think the most important card is Embercleave and making sure that you have an answer for that Embercleave in Brazen Borrower. The good thing from Nassif's side is that his version is playing the full 4 copies of Brazen Borrower. Now, other lists that have been submitted have been choosing to shave on that card because it's not particularly good in the mirror. But here, now, while the body itself is not very good, the fact that you do have an instant speed way to deal with a potentially lethal Embercleave, I think is going to be very important.
Okay. Let's see how this plays out. Of course, you know, Embercleave being one of the more important cards in the matchup and something that we'll definitely be keeping an eye out on, as it is the way to go over the top. But in the meantime, board development matters from Autumn's side, as they do need to get a board state out and start chipping away at the life total of Nassif before Nassif can start doing the big stuff.
Yeah, and you know, definitely a solid curve here. We've got to play for turns 1, 2, and 3. Probably. Oh, okay. So if you look at what's happening here right now, Autumn had the option here of playing a 2-drop, something like a Scavenging Ooze, but instead is prioritizing making sure that they have access to green source number 2 for turn 3. Because this is the turn where Nassif could potentially drop a Lucky Clover, and that's how games can snowball out of control for Nassif's side. So it is extremely important to make sure you have that answer for the Clover, because if they go turn 2 Clover, turn 3 Beanstalk Giant, and to bounce 2 permanents or stomp 2 of your things, the game's basically over on the spot. So it's really, really important to make sure you have access to that Gem Raiser on the following turn and sacrifice potentially that 1 point of damage that you would miss out on by playing a Scavenging Ooze on turn 2.
Yeah, great point, Paul. And this could absolutely matter. It is going to be Fae of Witches, though, here for
Look at this.
Gabriel Nassif just running out the 1/4 flyer.
Hey, sometimes...
Hey, you want to play a bunch of 1/1s?
Hey, you know what? It's doing a good job of, you know, keeping the board in a reasonable state. Additionally, by the way, playing that 1/1 Stonecoil Serpent does mean that Autumn can just play the Lovestruck Beast this turn, and now has 2 1/1s on the battlefield, meaning that it's far more likely that Autumn will be able to attack with the Lovestruck Beast. One nice way to be able to break this apart is by using a Stomp or a Petty Theft on a 1/1 to prevent the Lovestruck Beast from attacking.
You see the Kazandu Mammoth off the top of the library there for Burchett. Not bad at all. Particularly if Autumn would prefer to keep that Gem Raiser around. Also, why not even go big? Lovestruck Beast with 2 1/1s means it's likely to be able to get in there.
Yeah, I think right now the choice is basically between playing either the Mammoth or the Lovestruck Beast.
Right.
You know, for the next turn, it's effectively the same thing, right? You're gonna be able to play Shatter Skull Smashing next turn and have it attack for 5. The one upside here is, I guess, Nassif can't just main phase chop down.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it is roughly the same. Additionally, though, this does give Autumn the possibility of drawing a quote-unquote fetch land, right? Finding a Fabled Passage or an Evolving Wilds off the top means that this Mammoth can actually get in for 7 if they do top deck one of those lands. Well, one thing that I want to point out here is Nassif also on his side, well aware of the fact that a potential turn 3 Gem Raiser could be a thing, chose not to play Lucky Clover and playing around it and basically waiting till he has land number 4 to be able to go Lucky Clover into 2 spells.
Yeah, that's really smart. Also interesting to note that the Kazandu Mammoth is out there now where, let's say, Autumn plays a land here. There we go. That will be a 3/3 on Nassif's turn and actually vulnerable to the double Bone Crusher, or I should say the double Stomp, where the 5/5 Lovestruck Beast would not. Going back to the decisions from last turn.
Yeah, and it looks like Nassif is just going to choose to go for a bounce here just because he does want to protect his life total. Really needs to find a land here to be able to go Lucky Clover into double Stomp or double Petty Theft.
Right, but boy, you gotta like Nassif's chances if that happens. Let's see if there's an untapped land, and there it is. A
That's
mountain
big,
off
really
the
big.
top of the library will unlock all opportunities here for Gabriel Nassif, so that even if Autumn Burchett goes for the Gem Raiser, which they likely will, Nassif's going to get some value out of it on the way back. And also, Paul, I have to note here, there's a second copy of Lucky Clover in hand for Nassif. So even if this is just the beginning, it's going to be a lot more.
Yeah, and here Autumn is contemplating going for the Gem Raiser here to keep the Lucky Clover in check. Now, what can potentially happen here is Autumn goes for the Gem Raiser on the Stonecoil Serpent. Looks like actually going to get in for an attack here first, thinking that there is a high likelihood that Nassif will be able to break this up. Now, if Autumn does go for the Gem Raiser, Nassif can simply just bounce both the Stonecoil Serpent and the Lovestruck Beast, or potentially the token, leaving a 4/4 on the battlefield, but making it such that the Gem Raiser won't actually get this Lucky Clover off the battlefield because, if Nassif can keep these Clovers in play, all of a sudden his hand just kind of gets unlocked. He can double Stomp. Next turn, he can triple Stomp. If he draws a forest, all of a sudden you can triple Beanstalk Giant, and all of a sudden your mana woes just completely disappear.
Here comes the Gem Raiser, but this could be a bit of a blowout. You mentioned that Nassif, with access to double Brazen Borrower, or Petty Theft as it were, could even bounce the Lovestruck Beast and the Stonecoil. Remember, the human is not a viable target here for the Gem Raiser's mutate ability.
And as you can see, Autumn actually trying to play around Stomp here and considering mutating onto the Lovestruck Beast here instead of the Stonecoil Serpent, which means that Nassif would be forced to use the Brazen Borrower here instead of the Bone Crusher Giant.
Awesomely played game, by the way. Both players very much know what's going on here. Autumn says, you know what, I'm going to try to shut the door as much as possible on the full blowout. But I got to say, this is still pretty bad for Autumn. We're likely going to see the human token and the Lovestruck Beast bounced here, and that is rough. It means the Gem Raiser is just going to hit the battlefield without that extra trigger. That means the Lucky Clover is still going to be there, and Autumn's board is going to be decimated.
Yeah, this is a huge tempo play here from
Yikes. And that poor Kazandu Mammoth is just going to have to be a land here. So pass the turn back, 4/4 and a 1/1, but with a Lucky Clover on the battlefield, an additional one in hand, and Stomp available, it's pretty easy to imagine that Autumn can untap with just nothing here.
Yeah. I mean, Nassif, if he even wants to, can just do it all on his main phase if he wants to maybe play around something, but he can basically just go for the Stomp here, triple Stomp, and get rid of all the creatures in play.
Exactly. I think what Nassif is doing is looking and saying, okay, I would like to get that Gem Raiser off the battlefield. I don't know that Nassif cares so much about the Stonecoil Serpent right now. You'll take it as like an additional trigger, but maybe there could be a better target for it down the line.
Yeah, I mean, there is some consideration for preventing Autumn from maybe playing another Gem Raiser and just getting a target for the mutate off the battlefield now.
Well, I just wonder, because I think if I'm Nassif, I'm thinking, what if Autumn plays, say, a 2-mana creature? Then they would have a target for a second Gem Raiser. Now, Paul and I, by the way, we're theorizing here because there is not a second Gem Raiser, but putting ourselves in Gabriel Nassif's seat, and he's going to wait.
Yeah, and Autumn can also afford to be a little bit patient here. Just has to be mindful of the fact that a triple Stomp is very likely here, or one of the most devastating plays that Nassif could have. But big note here, at least from Nassif's side, of course, this is a very, very strong play, but he is missing that green source. So currently, he basically has no hand, right? His hand just doesn't do anything until he can find a forest. A forest would be an absolutely huge draw here, because if he doesn't find it, then all he's going to have available as a play is just hard casting a Bone Crusher Giant, which is okay, but Autumn's hand is pretty stacked right now.
Right, double Scavenging Ooze. Got the Brushfire Elemental, the Low-Struck Beast, and a Stone Coil that could be quite large here as a 5/5.
Yeah, a lot of options here. Wow. Okay, so the Stone Coil Serpent for 5 makes actually a good amount of sense. The 2 Brazen Powers have been used, and there's only 1 Giant Killer in Nassif's deck. Now, this was actually a reasonable draw here for Nassif, because he does play a white source in his sideboard. The land that they have is a Branch Left Pathway.
Yes.
Which is huge. So now he can get a mana source here, and then potentially 2 ways to 2 removal spells, basically, would be my guess. A lot of options here.
So does he just get the green source so that he can fire off the Fertile Footsteps and just load up?
Absolutely. That would be my first target. And then I would try to figure out what else I'm going to be getting. It could be a red cap melee. A Return to Nature would be fantastic, because it's just a nice, efficient answer to the Stone Coil Serpent that's already in play. Ugin, if you anticipate the game to go kind of a little bit longer. Banishing Light is also just a hard removal. Oh, it's not, excuse me. It is not a hard removal spell, because Autumn has access to Gemrazor. So
well, it certainly is on the Stone Coil, though, isn't it?
It is. It is. But so is a Return to Nature.
Right. Super interesting. You know, when you put Fae of Wishes in your main deck and you're like, all right, I'm going to cast Granted. I'm going to go get these silver bullets, these big game winners. And for Nassif, it's like, I'm just going to get, it's not even a forest. It's just a land that makes green mana. Woohoo.
Right. You know, getting that is, if there's ever a Wish sideboard, there will always be a land. And the question is what land you play. And players have actually chosen a lot of different lands. Some people choose to play Kazul's Fury, because it also doubles as a spell that you can use to basically fling Beanstalk Giant. But you've even seen Alan Wu and their team choose to play Fabled Passage, because just making sure you get whatever mana you need is extremely important. And basically the pathway of the Fabled Passage allows you to find whatever mana that you're missing. Because if you're wishing for a land, you really want to make sure that land comes into play untapped and also gets you the color that you need.
Interesting there. Nassif decided to chump block the Stone Coil Serpent rather than soak up the 3 damage from the Elemental, keeping his life total as high as possible. Perhaps there was Embercleave considerations there as well.
Well, the Elemental is unblockable, as it cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less.
Thank you. I forgot about that. Also, the possibility for Embercleave, of course, is always looming over the game. Yeah, I did forget that, though, against the Brushfire. Good call there, Paul.
So this is a big turn here for Nassif, because Autumn has a gigantic army in play. Nassif has answers to 2 of these creatures. And keep in mind, with 2 Clovers in play and the Beanstalk Giant, whenever he casts Fertile Footsteps, that's basically a mana neutral play, right? You pay 3 mana and you put 3 lands into play untapped rather. So likely to see that. And then he's probably going to be following that up with 2 removal spells, would be my guess. I'm wondering if he can actually play Return to Nature, Banishing Light, and a Fae of Wishes. He might be 1 mana short. I don't know if he's played a land here for his turn.
Boy, this is a big turn coming up here, because you can just sense that Nassif has so many resources available now that he's got his mana underneath him, that if Burchett can close out this game this coming turn, you know, maybe a well-timed Embercleave or something like that, or set up the win for the next turn, then that's kind of the window. It really does feel like Nassif is as we say, turning the corner here.
Yeah. Burchett needs a pretty big draw here, I think.
Oof. Look, because Andu Mammoth's a fine Magic card, but we needed something now, right? We needed Cleave or something with haste or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Burchett can get in for a good amount of damage this turn. I mean, if you just played the Mammoth, that's 5. And then if there are 3 creatures in the graveyard, that would be 8. So I wonder if Burchett just wants to whittle Nassif's life total down. If you play the Mammoth as a land, and then you exile a creature in the graveyard, you can attack for 6. Then you can play Lovestruck Beast and have a pretty sizable board.
Boy, this is going to be very, very close. Nassif does look like he's going to get to untap with all of those adventures, the Escape to the Wilds, and a bunch of lands. But at a fairly precarious life total, down to 4 goes Gabriel Nassif. And here comes that Lovestruck Beast as well as the Heart's Desire. So this is Autumn Burchett saying, check your move. Ooh, Giant Killer off the top.
That is a draw, because now if Autumn Burchett chooses to exile another creature to grow that ooze, all of a sudden that Giant Killer can chop down both the Lovestruck Beast and the Scavenging Ooze. And right now, so based off of Nassif's hand, I mean, he can run out both Bone Crusher Giant here and just cast Fae of Wishes. And that gives him 2 blockers, and then he can also have the option to chop down with the Giant Killer.
Great draw there for Nassif. Autumn is barely hanging on, and all they can really do is just look on, right? At this point, no cards in hand left for Autumn, so they're just going to have to sit here and see what Nassif comes up with for what could be a huge turn, and certainly the turn of the game so far. Here's Edgewall Innkeeper.
Yeah, and I think Nassif's going to play Edgewall Innkeeper and then probably a Fae of Wishes to still keep up that chop down.
Boy, if I'm in Autumn's seat, I am really nervous here, but I got to say, Autumn's done a very good job of applying maximum pressure here to Nassif, and they've got Nassif scrambling, no doubt about it, but a lot of resources available.
Yeah, Nassif is on the verge of coming back here. I feel like what Autumn draws this turn is going to be very, very big.
You know that Autumn's thinking, I believe in the Cleave.
Was he just going to run out? Okay. So this now means that an Embercleave off the top. Is that
There's
enough?
A Primal Might off the top of the library.
You Primal Might the Elemental. The other 2 creatures can't block.
Yes.
Right? And that's just going to be a lethal attack here from the Elemental.
So Autumn says, who needs the Cleave? I've got a Primal Might.
Wow. It's the green
just shakes his head.
Oh my goodness.
Autumn Burchett has found a win here, right?
Autumn needs to do it for 1 more. Do not do it for 3. If you do it for 3, the creatures will trade. You need to do it for at least 4. Why didn't Nassif keep up chop down? That's really interesting to me, because Autumn is very likely to pump that Scavenging Ooze. Oh man.
Or at least there's the beast. Everything comes into the red zone, and it looks like Autumn has locked up game number 1 here. Nassif is reeling now as Autumn Burchett found exactly what they needed off the top of the library. Boom, boom, and boom. Autumn Burchett picks up game number 1 thanks to the top of the library. A huge relief for Autumn Burchett, but we are not done yet. That was only game number 1. The players are now going to go to sideboards, and it's funny to watch their reactions, because on one hand, you saw Autumn as they looked to the side, breathed a sigh of relief, gave a big smile, and now back to business. And Nassif, on the other hand, you can see it all on his face.
The thing is, I'm sure he considered that as an option, went with the Bone Crusher Giant, and then after seeing what happened, he's probably thinking, man, maybe I should have kept the chop down up, right? I mean, that's what's going through his mind right now. But, of course, you have to kind of bounce back. Now, Autumn, of course, given that Nassif tapped out, had a lot of cards that they could have drawn, right? I mean,
Mhm.
4 Primo Mites and 4 Embercleaves were still left in their deck.
Yeah, that's a lot of clean outs there. Oof.
Whew.
This deck
Yeah,
really, sometimes it just runs the opponent over, and you'll see Autumn just like, yeah, you're dead. You're way, way dead, off of a good Embercleave draw. But sometimes it gives you a good sweat like this game where you're really peeling for the win. But Autumn able to get the job done, and they're going to pick up the first game. And again, you can really see the stress and the tension on the players' faces. Nassif's back to his characteristic smile, but that's going to bug him.
yeah. I mean, one of the most accomplished players, the most accomplished player, I believe, in this tournament. And he's been here before, so he'll be able to bounce back for sure. Just kind of get back to work. He's in sideboarding. If you look at his sideboard, he's got both a Shattered Sky and a Storm's Wrath. Probably bringing one of those in, and possibly even another spot removal spell, like something like a Banishing Light here, given that there is still that red cat melee. So
always tricky to do sideboarding when your sideboard is a wish board, but usually there's a few little changes you could make. It is interesting to note that if there is a card that's extremely good to have, you'd still almost rather have it in your board because it gives you 4 chances to go grab it with Granted rather than 1 to just draw it naturally.
Yeah, and especially if you're on the play, you have a little bit more time to be able to do that, to wish on turn 4. If you're on the draw, you might just need to bring in the removal spells just because you need to be able to cast them on curve and not take a turn off to wish for them.
Kind of a sketchy one here for Autumn Burchett. You see the Stonecoil Serpent and the Edgewall Innkeeper not really working well with each other, but there is the key card here in Embercleave, and if Autumn can find a 2-drop and a 3-drop in the next couple of turns, this draw could turn lethal very quickly. But if the lands keep coming off the top like that for Autumn, this draw is going to fall on its face.
Yeah, Autumn needs to find some threats here quickly. However, I mean, Nassif's hand has all of, I guess, the core cards that you want for the Adventure Shell. You have the Edgewall Innkeeper and the Lucky Clover, but doesn't have one of those cheap pieces of interaction just yet.
Right. You really want to see the stomps and the petty thefts here. If you're Nassif, if you're Autumn, you want to see 2-drops and 3-drops. We'll see Edgewall Innkeeper turn 1 for Autumn, but they've got a Stonecoil Serpent to kind of fill in the curve at 2 if they'd like it. But then that next turn is really important, and they're going to need to find some action for it. The good news is there's a lot, right? There's the Kazandu Mammoths and the Lovestruck Beasts and that kind of stuff. So there is action in that library. Autumn just needs to find it, but in a very short window. That's the hard part. A couple of draw steps to do so.
Yeah, looks like Nassif is just debating whether or not he wants to kind of run out that Clover. Running out the Clover here is nice just in terms of how you spend your mana, right? You can go Clover this turn. Next turn, if you don't find an adventure spell, you can go in Edgewall Innkeeper and just hard cast Veil Wishes, right? Because that's already that's an excellent use of your mana for that turn. You get to play a 1/4 and draw 2 cards.
So it maybe wasn't the perfect draw for Autumn, but a removal spell to take out the opposing Edgewall Innkeeper does fill in the curve and gives Autumn something to do here on turn 2 and takes out a key card on the other side. So heck yeah, a 2-mana spell, Autumn will take it.
Yeah, interesting decision point here. Will Nassif hold on to the Veil of Wishes or just cast it? And it looks like he's going for the cast here.
Oof, another land though for Burchett means that they are starting to get into that dire territory. We could see the 3/3 Stonecoil Serpent this turn, but then that's it. That is Autumn having used up their runway, and they absolutely need to find action spells probably for the next 2 to 3 turns to stay ahead here, or else it's going to take kind of a miracle Embercleave turn at some point. Now, the good news is, cancel that order. I was just going to say that Nassif hadn't found that exact card, and there it is. Stomp off the top with Lucky Clover on the battlefield and another one in hand, Paul. This turn is going to be gross. The board's going to be gone on Autumn's side.
Yeah, the board's going to be gone. We're going to have 2 Lucky Clovers in play. And Nassif could even potentially line up a situation where if he doesn't find adventure cards, you can just return Veil of Wishes to his hand and get 3 cards out of his sideboard.
Boy, you know, one good top deck deserves another. You know, neither of these were miracles, right? Like, these are cards that they both had multiple options to top deck, but boy, the timing on that for Nassif was perfect.
Ooh.
And this sketchy keep from Autumn has really fallen apart. This was one of those borderline keeps, right? Autumn's like, okay, if I can find a little bit of action from, you know, by turn 4 or so, I should be good to go. And Autumn did find really just the minimal amount of action, and then has gotten a bit unlucky here and drawn straight lands since. And Autumn can do nothing but stare down at triple Fabled Passage and an Embercleave in hand. No creatures on board, and now Nassif's beating down somehow. Is that a third Lucky Clover? That actually might be too many.
I wonder if Nassif's actually just going to pass here and just pitch the 2 cards that he has in hand with 2 Clovers in play. Then you can wish for basically 3 cards out of the sideboard. I think that's what he wants to do here.
Oh, you mean to activate the Fae of Wishes ability?
Right.
Yeah, that would make sense. Well, Autumn found a spell, but it was about the least impactful spell that they could have found here besides the second Embercleave. It's an Edgewall Innkeeper, which, at least as it sits, just a 1/1.
Yeah, and Autumn's deck doesn't have an instant speed way to kill the Fae of Wishes in response to picking it up, outside of, I guess, double stomp. Yeah, that would basically be the only way.
And as the game goes further, especially with the mana being developed for Nassif in a reasonable way here, you know, the top of the library is just by default going to be kinder to Nassif than it is to Burchett. So many bigger draws available. Here's Fae of Wishes back into hand now for Nassif, as you predicted, Paul. And we're going to see triple granted here to set up for the next turn to be probably devastating.
Yeah, I mean, this should basically lock up the game, right? I mean, Autumn is already extremely behind just with what's on the board right now. But now you're talking about getting the 3 best possible cards in this matchup, putting it into your hand, and then also you can just cast Fae of Wishes to get another card back due to the Edgewall Innkeeper that's in play. So looks like he's getting that nice branch lock pathway again.
Yeah, the key card apparently in the matchup.
Yeah, and then a draw 5, and
then something reactive, or maybe Ugin or something like that.
Yeah, lot of options here for the last card. You could get a Return to Nature, maybe, possibly a negate if you think your opponent might have a Planeswalker or something.
Go big or go home, Paul. Ugin.
Big Ugin.
Yeah, the finisher.
Yeah, and this Edgewall Innkeeper doing some work too.
Wow, that's just gross. That turn was really nasty. Getting the land, hitting the land drop, and then getting to cast the Fae of Wishes also means that the Innkeeper draws a card for Nassif, and it was a good one. It was a Beanstalk Giant, which is going to be another one of those mana neutral Beanstalks. Embereth Shieldbreaker, where have you been all game? Embereth Shieldbreaker, you are way, way too late to the party. Now, Autumn can run it out.
It was a good draw.
Yeah,
it's a good draw.
Fine. It's just the damage is done.
Oh,
Nassif doesn't even flinch when he sees this. Now, again, not a bad draw because you get the card as well off of the Innkeeper, but it's another forest. Ouch.
Yeah, Autumn at this point is just far too behind. Nassif has already gotten so much value off the Innkeepers and the Clovers at this point. I mean, this Beanstalk Giant's going to get him 3 lands. Then he can play an Innkeeper, then an Escape to the Wilds. He can double bounce anything in case something happens, but he's also sitting at a very comfortable 19 life.
Paul, it's only getting him 2 lands. Hello?
Oh, excuse me. Excuse me, 1 die.
It's only costing him 1 mana to go search up.
I will revise my previous statement. Gabriel Nassif is in a lot of trouble here.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. That was the difference. Here's the Escape to the Wilds. Yeah, so this one, we can call this one over here. There really is no way for Autumn Burchett to come out of this mess. Their deck just isn't designed to come back from a situation this dire. To be fair, this Gruul deck does have the ability to steal games. We saw that in game number 1, and we've seen it throughout the weekend where, a well-timed Embercleave can actually steal a game that looks like it was about over. The problem is you need a big creature at least on the battlefield, and Autumn just doesn't have it right now.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think what Autumn's thinking here, right? You see those Fabled Passages sitting on the battlefield, is trying to draw a Brushfire Elemental and then crack all the Fabled Passages and then put the Embercleave on that and see what happens.
Yeah, there's no way Nassif could possibly have an answer here. But yes, that was basically the plan, right? Mm-hmm. So with the crack of the Fabled Passage and then the third Fabled Passage, that's 4 landfall triggers. That's 9/9. I mean, that would have been an attack for 20.
Right.
That would have been an attack for 20. So,
and look at the blockers on the other side, right?
Yeah.
Like they can't block it, as we learned in the first game. So, yeah.
Yeah. Of course, we know that Nassif does have access to that Brazen Borrower. Actually, there's one face up here too from the Escape to the Wilds too.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. So this was sort of walking through. I think that there were some people in chat saying, why doesn't Autumn just go to game 3? For the last few turns, and I think that was part of the thinking why, and also why Autumn hasn't cracked the Fabled Passages as well. But as we know, that ain't happening this time.
Yeah, Autumn also typically doesn't really concede very often, so they'll play until the very end. Mm-hmm. For the most part.
Give Nassif a little bit of a sweat here as he looks on.
Always a bad sign when you're the aggressive deck and then your opponent starts attacking you. That's how you know you're on the back foot. So.
That's definitely the worst case, yeah. And, it's worth considering here, too, that, given what we saw yesterday and kind of historically from Nassif, sometimes that match clock can be a factor. Doesn't seem like it will be here. But, again, another reason for if you're in Autumn Burchett's seat, you just play it out.
Yeah.
All right, Autumn's going to play Stone Coil Serpent as a 3/3, and Autumn was finally able to build out a reasonable board here.
Yeah, until 2 of those cards get bounced back to their hand. And the reason Nassif is doing this is he's going to have to cast this card anyways, given that it's currently in from the Escape to the Wilds.
Right.
So, if he wants to be able to cast it later and get some value with that Edgewell Innkeeper that he has in play, he needs to cast Petty Theft.
Yeah, it goes from one exile zone to a slightly different exile zone.
Yeah.
And this is Bone Crusher. Copy it.
And then Ugin, 3 damage.
Right.
For lethal.
And so that is going to be game number 2, going to Gabriel Nassif, picking up the victory. And not a huge pushback there from Autumn Burchett. They really had a rough draw, way too many lands for this deck to function. And we'll see if things improve here in game number 3 for Autumn.
Yeah,
lots of 8-mana lightning bolts today, Paul. It's kind of the name of the game from Nassif.
Hey, you do what you got to do. I mean, the great thing about the Ugin is, if you're extremely ahead, that's what you can do. And alternatively, you can just kind of use it to completely reset the board. I wonder if you see the sideboarding a little bit differently. Yeah, you do see, it looks like a Storm's Wrath coming in here now that he's on the draw.
Yeah, worth remembering that he does have Shatter the Sky as well. So he kind of has, the turn 4 Storm's Wrath is kind of when you want to fire it off against Autumn's list. The later in the game when you're searching up stuff and you could find the Shatter, that'll take care of everything.
And look at this. He's bringing in like a bunch. He's bringing in 3 sideboard cards here now that he's on the draw. I see a Return to Nature, a Red Cat Melee, and a Storm's Wrath. The problem here is just kind of figuring out what you want to cut, because every card seems pretty good in this matchup, right?
Yeah.
You have your Adventures package. The bounce effect from the Brazen Borrower is pretty valuable here against Embercleave and also Primal Might potentially. Of course, you're not cutting Bone Crusher Giant. Maybe you trim on Escape to the Wilds.
Yeah, boy, looking at the list, you described it yesterday as kind of 2 different archetypes jammed together, and that really doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room, for value cards in between. You kind of need all of these things. Okay, game number 3 incoming here. Autumn Burchett versus Gabriel Nassif. Nassif felt like he was in a good position in game number 1, but Autumn had something to say about it when they drew Primal Might off the top of the library. Game number 2, a land-heavy keep from Autumn turned into a land-heavy draw, and Nassif was able to get the job done. And now we've got game number 3. Check out that hand for Autumn here, Paul.
Yeah, this one definitely has a lot more action. It's really, really important for Autumn to draw land number 3 here to kind of unlock their hand, as they'll have plenty of stuff to do over the course of this game if they can just find land number 3.
There's an Edgewall Innkeeper.
Yeah, I guess maybe they're considering running that out, so if they draw land number 3, they can just start casting adventure creatures and drawing cards. Also, by playing the Edgewall Innkeeper, even if you don't draw land number 3, you can just hard cast an Ember Shieldbreaker to try to hit your land drops. Of course, if you do that, you are exposing yourself to a Stomp on turn 2 from Gabriel Nassif. Yeah, but a really good draw here from Nassif. Keeping a hand with no cheap interaction and finding that Bone Crusher Giant off the top means that now the way he can sequence his spells is, he can go Bone Crusher Giant here, kill something, into Beanstalk Giant, into Omnath, with the Fabled Passage, the classic combo of Omnath into Fabled Passage into, whatever you want, basically.
Right. See if currently deciding what it is that he'd like to cast here. Leave up Bone Crusher Giant, leave up Stomp, or play an Innkeeper, it looks like are the options.
Yeah, one interesting thing here is I'm not sure he wanted to play Forest.
I don't think
I'm not right. So I don't think he wanted to play Forest, and the reason is this way: if he doesn't play Forest, he can go Bone Crusher. He can go Stomp this turn with one of the other lands. Play Crackhound Pathway as a mountain. Then you play Branchloft Pathway as a plains. Then you go Fertile Footsteps on the Beanstalk Giant into Forest, into Edgewall Innkeeper. And by sequencing it that way, you have an Edgewall Innkeeper in play. You still get to cast Stomp, and then on the next turn, you can go Omnath into Fabled Passage. By playing a Forest now, you cannot Fertile Footstep into another Forest and cast Omnath on turn 4.
All right, well, there's the Bone Crusher Giant. Oh, Branchloft Pathway here. Okay. That'll work.
Look at that Return to Nature here. That's going to be a surprise.
Right. And Chap thought that they saw Nassif take out all of the Brazen Borrowers, or 3 of them, if there were 4. I can't remember.
I think he took out some. He might have also cut some of the Fae of Wishes, just because he's bringing a lot of those sideboard cards in.
Yeah, maybe 3 of the 4. I'm curious. I would love to see exactly what the logic is there, because, man, I think I'd just be too scared to take out anything that could save me from the big Embercleave hit. That seems to be the way that most of these games end, is Autumn does a bunch of stuff and Nassif answers most of it, but Autumn's left over with some type of, a small threat and a big threat, or a couple of medium threats, something like that. And then all of a sudden Embercleave hits the battlefield, and Nassif needs to have very specific answers or the game ends in a turn or 2.
Yeah. He did draw. He did, to be fair, replace one of the borrowers with a return to nature, which
Right.
basically answers it in a similar way, but gets it off the battlefield, and also is a hard removal spell for Stonecoil Serpent. But this is going to be a huge turn. Autumn at this point, needed to kind of get off to a decent start. Found Evolving Wilds, and this is of course the cost of playing something like this in an aggressive deck. When you do draw it as your third land, it's awful. I mean, it is terrible.
Oh,
yeah.
This is so brutal for Autumn, who now has to watch on as Gabriel Nassif resolves Omnath and then plays Fabled Passage for a potentially explosive turn.
Oh yeah, and this is going to be explosive. We're going to see Edgewall Innkeeper and Beanstalk Giant following up in Omnath. Plus, by the way, against an aggro deck gaining 4 life, not too bad.
There's the Edgewall Innkeeper. Looks like not enough, or excuse me, the Bone Crusher Giant. No green mana available there, perhaps. Or not enough mana for the Beanstalk, I mean. Here's Bone Crusher, but with the other Bone Crusher on the stack, the Edgewall Innkeeper has already triggered, so that is going to be another card for Nassif. Oh, boy. Bone Crusher Giant plus Omnath, couple of extra cards in hand, 4 extra life, and Nassif is like, you may proceed. Like, that is just so rough.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, I think Autumn might just kind of be on the defensive here. And look, they're playing Lovestruck Beast here, which is a pretty good blocker. However, Nassif can just go attack with Bone Crusher Giant, Lovestruck Beast blocks, and then you stomp the Lovestruck Beast.
Yeah, I mean, with the amount of resources at Gabe's disposal here, he doesn't mind throwing that away.
I mean, it looks like we're just going to see a 6/6 being cast here. I think it might be a hard cast Beanstalk Giant time here. That's going to be the biggest, baddest creature on the board.
It is. I used to think that this was really good against Embercleave until I saw M. Handy yesterday just mow down a Beanstalk Giant. And I'm like, okay, never mind. I mean, generally speaking, it is good, but yeah, sometimes it's not good enough. Wow, Omnath getting in the red zone as well. So it looks like it's going to be the Lovestruck Beast gobbling up Omnath and then Stomp to finish it off.
Yeah, well, Nassif doesn't really have a way to generate more mana off that Omnath in hand, right? And that's where it really shines. At this point, he's so far ahead, he doesn't really care about the life total. And what he wants to do is just keep the board clear so that this Beanstalk Giant can continue going in unimpeded.
This whole 1 spell per turn thing from Burchett has been painful for them. Just playing a tap land here and then a Bone Crusher Giant. But Nassif has been able to deploy multiple spells per turn for multiple turns now. And that's where you see this advantage really building up.
Yeah, and you're probably going to see a cycle here just to see if Nassif can find something to go with that Lucky Clover. Or, hey, another Omnath.
Yeah, it's castable too. Yeah, now, Nassif won't get any extra bonuses from it outside of the drawn card, because...
Yeah, just a 4 mana 4/4 that draws a card.
Just a card.
That's all.
But you called it, Paul. This is Autumn Burchett on the defensive. Never, ever where you want to be with this Gruul deck. This deck is built around Embercleave and Primal Might. Cards that benefit you for attacking. If you're having to block and trade off your board just to stay alive, it means you are in a very dire situation, as we see Nassif follow up with Bone Crusher Giant, and that huge Beanstalk Giant is just wreaking havoc, as we've seen this Gruul deck be able to go over the top of it, but not if it's attacking you. There are not great blocks, and even a 5/5 Stonecoil Serpent isn't going to do a good enough job to take that giant off the battlefield.
So that's a Beanstalk Giant. So now we can go Omnath, land, Fertile Footsteps,
oof,
get some more mana, and then return to nature, get that Stonecoil Serpent off the battlefield.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just going to be way too much. So
Gabriel Nassif marching towards victory here. You see that Giant is now a 9/9. by the way. It's lethal on its own at this point.
Wait, hold on. There's more. Oh, right.
Yeah,
now you get to deal 4 damage.
Now it's a 10-10. Now it's an 11-11.
All right. And check out this disenchant I boarded in.
And it looks like that is going to do it. Gabriel Nassif picks up this game number 3 and advances here over Burchett. Now, again, they are not out.